When you're thinking of capitals of the Roman Empire, you're probably not thinking about any city in Germany. In fact, you're probably thinking about a bright, sunny place in the Mediterranean and not the cloudy, cold and rainy Moselle Valley in Germany. Yet here I am in the city of Trier, which was once one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire, with a population of between 70 and 100,000. And in fact, it was the seat of Constantine's power before he marched on Rome and won a victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The city has a few very well-preserved Roman structures, such as the Black Gate behind me and the Constantine Basilica, which used to be part of Constantine's palace and is now a Protestant church. There's also the remains of a few bathhouses, as well as a Roman bridge which is still in use. The city now called Trier was originally called Augusta Treverorum when it was founded in the late 1st century BC, and the name refers to the Emperor Augustus as well as the Treveri tribe which used to inhabit the area. The gate has become something of a symbol for the city, so it was built around 170 AD, and there used to be 4 gates, but this is the only one that remains. And like a lot of old Roman structures, the ones that have come down to us today survived because they were used for some purpose. So this was used as a church at one point. So what happened was that around the 11th century, the gate was already somewhat ruined, but there was a Greek monk named Simeon who became a saint in both the Orthodox and the Catholic religions. He came here and he used it as his hermitage. So he became a hermit and he lived up in one of the towers, and it was later converted into a church. So today most of the church structure has been removed, and we have Napoleon to thank for that, because when he conquered the city, he wanted it restored to its previous Roman state. So he had most of the church structure removed, and the current state of the gate reflects largely what was there in Napoleonic times. So now let's go inside and have a closer look at what the gate looks like. And now this is what the back side of the gate looks like. All right, and now let's actually go up inside the gate. So now we're on one of the upper levels of the gate, and we can see some of the decorations that remain from when this place used to be a church. And here we can see what the church used to look like before it was reverted back to its Roman state by Napoleon. From up here, we can actually see another Roman structure. So this is the Catholic Cathedral of Trier, and it's actually built upon the remains of an older Roman church. All right, so that's it for the Black Gate of Trier. Now let's go have a look at some more Roman structures. So now we're at the Catholic Cathedral of Trier. So this structure dates back to about the 11th century, but there's been a church at this site since maybe the time of Constantine. That's according to some sources. It's not really known for sure. But in either case, this is considered to be the oldest cathedral in all of Germany, and it's the largest religious structure in Trier. So parts of the original structure still remain, though that structure was destroyed in the 9th century by the Vikings. So the Vikings did make it this far. We're about halfway down Germany, and the Vikings, they could sail up rivers, and the Moselle was no exception. They sailed up that river and they sacked the city and they destroyed the church. All right, so let's get a closer look at the church. So here on the north side of the church, we can still see some of the original Roman brickwork. So although the main structure of the church was built in the Romanesque style, each time they would add something to the church, they would use the style that was in fashion at the time. So we also have some Gothic and some Baroque elements in this church. Now let's go have a look inside. So that was the Cathedral of Trier. So like I said, only part of the structure is actually Roman. So we have the bricks on the north facade, and I think I might have seen some Roman bricks inside, but I'm not sure if they actually are Roman or if they only look that way. So I couldn't make any commentary inside of the cathedral because I had to respect the silence in there, but we did see some interesting things. So there's the tombs of some of the bishops of Trier. They were electors in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I'm not going to get into it, but the Holy Roman Empire was not really related to the Roman Empire. It was a German state that existed for much of the Middle Ages. But these bishops were some of the electors. They were very powerful. There were only 7 or 8 electors depending on the time period. So these were very powerful men, and some of them were buried inside of the cathedral, and we saw some of their tombs. Now there's also an important holy relic. There's the holy robes inside of here. So we couldn't actually go see it because that area is reserved only for prayer. So this is not a museum, but they're in there. Whether or not they actually are the holy robes is another story. So we are going to see the Basilica of Constantine in just a bit, which is the largest and most well-preserved Roman structure in Trier. But first, there's a few more Roman structures that we're going to have a look at. So also in Trier is a functional Roman bridge. So this bridge dates back to the 2nd century AD, and it replaces an older wooden bridge that was built around 17 BC. So this bridge spans the Moselle River, and it's the oldest standing bridge in Germany, as well as the oldest Roman bridge north of the Alps. So the lower part of the bridge is the original Roman structure, whereas the top part was renewed twice, once in the 12th and then in the 18th century. The bridge remains in very good condition and sees regular use by both pedestrian and vehicular traffic. Now let's head west to see the remains of what were once the largest baths north of the Alps. These are the remains of the Barber Baths. Named after the nearby St. Barbara Church, these baths were built in the 2nd century when the original baths near the Forum could not support the growing population, and the baths were supplied by the nearby Ruhr Aqueduct. Unfortunately, the baths fell into disrepair during the Middle Ages, and the materials were used in the construction of some nearby structures. The currently excavated area represents less than half of the total surface covered by the baths, so that means that the foundations extend underneath the modern buildings that we see around the area today. Here we can see the remains of a hypocaust where fires were lit to heat the bath. Now let's head east to the much better preserved imperial baths. I'm now at the Imperial Baths in Trier. So construction here started around 300 by Constantius Chlorus, so that was Constantine's father. And then when Constantine took over, he continued the construction. However, there was just one problem with calling this the Imperial Baths, and that's that construction was never completed. So construction probably stopped sometime around 316 when a civil war broke out with Licinius, who was Constantine's rival in the east. Constantine eventually defeated Licinius in 324. Though once he defeated Licinius, he was too focused on new projects to complete this one, such as his new city of Constantinople, or New Rome as it was officially known back then. This large curved wall marks the spot of a heated swimming pool, which was adjacent to the Caldarium. Part of the wall was reconstructed during the 20th century, but everything else you see here is original Roman construction. And if we go westwards, we can find the Frigidarium and the cold swimming pool. And if we take a left, we'll find the city's old medieval wall, which brings us to why this bath survived, but the Barber Baths did not. So like pretty much every Roman structure that has come down to us, it's because it was transformed into something else. It became useful. So these baths became a cavalry barracks in the later 4th century. And during the Middle Ages, this became part of a castle for a noble family. Eventually, this bathhouse was incorporated into the city walls, which we find here. So these are the medieval city walls. These are not the Roman city walls. Those were torn down and used for building materials in the early Middle Ages. So as big as the remains of these baths are, they're still smaller than the Barber Baths, which gives you an idea of how big the Barber Baths would have been. We'll head to Constantine's Basilica in just a bit, but first let's head over to the amphitheater, which was the largest north of the Alps and had seating for 20,000 spectators. So here we are at the Amphitheater of Trier. It was built in the 2nd century, and like a lot of things in Trier, it was the largest north of the Alps. And that's because Trier really was the most important city north of the Alps, given its status as the capital of the Praetorian Prefecture of Gaul and the powerful Rhine legions that came along with it. So we can see that the general shape remains, though the places where the seats were is now just grass. They would have used those stones in other constructions, but they would have found this lower part useful. So this is the cellar of the amphitheater, and there would have been gladiators, there would have been animals down here, and they could have gone up through elevators in the floor of the arena here, just like they would have done in Rome. So during medieval times, this was actually a wine cellar. So there's some grapes growing on the slopes nearby. This is the Moselle Valley. This is wine country in Germany. So this place survived intact because they used it to store their casks down here. So they actually would call this whole area the cask cellar. So the amphitheater survived because, in part, it was a cask cellar. Now let's head over to the largest intact Roman structure in Trier. And finally, here we are at the Basilica of Constantine. This structure was built in the early 4th century and served as part of a massive palace complex. So this structure is just huge. It's over 100 feet tall and 200 feet long. And we can see that it's made out of brick. Now, Roman brick was extremely durable, and actually it's a lot more durable than stone. So we actually have Vitruvius in his book on architecture. He gives us a formula for the depreciation of stone structures, but he doesn't give a formula for the depreciation of brick structures, because brick is just so durable that it doesn't really degrade over time the way that stone does. So this original Roman brick is still standing after 1700 years, and we can even see some of the original cladding, which I think is plaster. So we can see it here, and we can see it under most of the windows here. There's only very little left. So looking at the structure from the outside, we can see why some churches are called basilicas. So this basilica was a Roman administrative building, and they're found all over the empire. And we can see some things that are common in churches. So you see this rounded part here. This is the apse in many churches, and we can see how the main structure extends a little bit outside of where the apse is. And this design was used in many churches because a lot of basilicas, just like this one, became churches in the medieval period. And when they built new churches, they built them to look like the Roman basilicas. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, this basilica became the residence of the Bishop of Trier. And in the 19th century, it became a Protestant church. So now let's go have a look inside. So we didn't really see much inside of the church, and that's because the building was bombed in 1944. So the bomb fell and the church caught fire and most of the interior was destroyed. What we do see now is the bare brick walls, and we see a few additions. So there's a few organs from the 20th century and there's a few 19th century sculptures, but there's nothing that remains of the old Roman interior. And in fact, that old Roman interior was gone long before World War II, because just like most Roman structures, anything of value was stripped long ago and used elsewhere. So because the basilica was part of a larger palace complex, we can actually see the remains of some of the out structures right here. In any case, there's not much that's left from these other structures. The only real structure that remains is the basilica itself. So just as the basilica was once part of Constantine's palace complex, it later became part of the bishop's palace complex. So here we see a 17th century palace built adjacent to the church. I hope you enjoyed watching this video on Rome and Trier. Let me know in the comments if you've ever visited or if you ever plan on visiting. It's a great city to visit and it's very accessible by train, and once you get here, everything is very walkable. And of course, if you enjoyed watching this video, then please consider subscribing and activating notifications. Thank you for watching.